All right. So I think Xian is here. Oh, hi.
Hi.
Hi. Hello. You can unmute
Hi
yourself.
there. Hi guys.
Hi, guys. Would you like to introduce a bit more about yourself?
All right. Okay, so hi, good afternoon to everyone who's watching us live from the Fridays for Future Singapore YouTube channel, and for everyone that is with us today. I am Xian Guevara, the National Coordinator for Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines, and I am here to talk to you guys about what YAKAP is and what we are doing basically, and why climate justice and people knowing more about climate actions all over the world is very important, and what we can do to help each other out.
All right. Sounds great.
All right, so do I start?
Yeah, sure. Go
Yeah.
All
ahead.
right. So, yeah, let me start. So, first, let me talk about who YAKAP is, what we are, what we do as an organization. And yeah, so basically, we are the Fridays for Future counterpart in the Philippines, and Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines is an alliance of different individuals, youth groups, and student councils all over the Philippines. And we basically have 5 points of unities. The first one is climate justice. We have to understand that climate justice is very important in the climate, in being a climate activist. The second one is when we talk about climate action, it has to be urgent. So the urgency of climate action is our second point of unity. The third one is youth-led collective action. So if we look at the trend all over the world, climate activism isn't new, but what is emerging right now is that the youth are taking the lead in climate action. So even if this is a multi-sectoral struggle, the farmers, the fisherfolk, the workers, the women, and everyone else basically is should be involved in this action. The youth is taking the lead because we are basically the ones that will inherit the planet. The fourth one is the defense of environmental defenders. I think Hongyu and Ming had already given you guys a briefer on what the terror law is, so I can talk to you guys more about that later on. But yeah, basically in the Philippines, and not just in the Philippines, but in the entire world, there is how do they call it? There's a big threat to different activists and different environmental defenders. So the point of unity of defending those defenders is very important, not just in the Philippines, but in the entire world. And lastly, our point of unity is system change. We all know that the climate crisis is a very big thing. And the only way to actually solve it is when we shift from this profit oriented system that puts profit over the planet and over its people, until we change that into something that's pro people and pro environment. That is only when we can actually address the climate crisis. So let me first talk about what is happening in the Philippines and maybe some parts of the world, so you guys would understand um, the possible effects that it can have to different races and to different people. And while you guys in Singapore do not necessarily feel that, it doesn't mean that it's not actually happening. So me personally, I come from Manila, which is the city center of the Philippines. And here in Manila, I could actually say that the impact of the climate crisis isn't that big as opposed to the ones in the rural cities. Okay, so me, I can say that I am privileged enough in such a way that when there's a big storm that comes up and there's flooding, immense flooding, or maybe when there's a drought, I don't feel any of it. When there's a big storm and when there's flooding, I see it on the news. But me personally, the biggest impact that can happen to me is me having slow internet connection, or probably disruptions in our electrical services. But that's it. So does that mean that me not feeling exactly what happens during these calamities, should I not care? Well, that's the thing. We should actually care even more, because we are privileged enough to not be affected by these calamities and these effects of climate change, but we can actually do something and actually reach out to more people, as opposed to people who are in the countryside or in the rural areas that do not have any internet connections at all. With this pandemic going on, it's very important it's very hard here in the Philippines. The strikes that we have from physical ones to the on-ground ones, we suddenly have to shift into the online sphere. We now do webinars, we now do online strikes, and basically just tweet and post it on Facebook and on different social media platforms. That's what we are doing right now. Okay, so us as privileged people who don't necessarily feel that, it's up to us now to amplify the voices of those who are not heard. Okay, it's not true that they're voiceless. Okay, we are not giving a voice to them because they already have a voice, but their voice is unheard. That's why us Filipinos in the cities, or you guys maybe in Singapore, with you guys not feeling, I can't speak about the situation in Singapore, but in reality, as opposed to the Philippines, we all know that Singapore is doing quite better in terms of COVID-19 response, in terms of response to the climate emergency. Okay, so that is why it is very, very important for us to work together to amplify basically the voices of everyone else who are in the most affected peoples and areas. So let me talk more about the situation here in the Philippines, aside from those calamities. There's also a problem with climate education. So when we talk about climate education, here in the Philippines, what's being taught to us is, okay, there's reduce, reuse, recycle, and that's it. Okay, when we talk about global warming, when we talk about climate change, the answer that's being fed to us when we talk about climate education is that do reduce, reuse, recycle, and that's it. But in reality, that is not the case. If we try to reduce, reuse, recycle, that is a very good thing. Okay, I am not discrediting or discounting those things, but we have to remember that doing those things alone is not actually enough. Okay, the accountability has to fall on the biggest polluters and emitters of the world. Okay, so that means companies that are there are, according to studies, there are 100 companies, and those 100 companies alone contribute 71% of the global emissions. Okay, and when we talk about countries, USA and China, they are the biggest emitters. USA historically is the biggest emitter. Right now, currently, China is the biggest emitter. So in terms of responsibility, should it fall on Philippines, us as a developing country who is one of the most affected peoples and areas, but we are not actually contributing that much to emissions. So we have to learn those as well. When we talk about climate education, we have to arm people basically with the education that is needed for them to take action. Okay? So the next part will be basically the environmental defenders. So the Philippines, if you guys have not heard, we are the first in Asia and second in the entire world that is the most deadliest place for environmental defenders. Here in the Philippines, environmental defenders or climate activists are being tagged as terrorists. That's why they have the terror law. Here in the Philippines, if you are a climate activist or any activist in general, you can be jailed. You can be you can have false charges given to you, and you can actually be killed. So it's not surprising that more and more activists in the Philippines are being scared. Okay, so on our end, we should educate more and more and more people about climate action and the climate crisis for them to take action. We have a pattern here when we talk about activism. It's three things. The first one is you arouse people. Arouse meaning make them understand why it's very important and why we should act. Why this is something that is urgent and why this is something that um, we have to do something about it. Okay, so once you've aroused them, once they know that this is very important and they should do something about it, the next thing that you do is organize them. Okay, so when we talk about organizations or organizing people, you have to put them in organizations or in alliances. Make them understand that doing things collectively is stronger than doing things individually. So when we talk about, for example, mobilizations, if you're just one person on the streets holding a placard or holding a sign or a banner, people might not listen to you. But if you are a million people and all of you guys are shouting and saying that we want climate action, we want urgent climate action, that is actually something that you guys, that people would think now, why are they actually doing this? Why are there a lot of people on the streets mobilizing and talking about climate change? So when we talk about organizing people, it's letting people know what options there are in terms of organization. So once they find their advocacies, there are many advocacy groups, not just in the Philippines or the entire world, but even in Singapore. I believe that there are many different advocacy groups, not just about environment and about climate. Okay, so when we um, tell people to go into organizations, make them go into organizations that fit their advocacies the best and fit their work style the best. So even in the Philippines, we have different environmental groups, okay? And what YAKAP does is, since we are an alliance, we are trying to collaborate with different environmental groups. So there we have environmental groups that focus on saving the seas. We have environmental groups that focus on uh, waste to energy, no to waste to energy, environmental defenders. So what YAKAP does is we make them collaborate with one another and see the common denominators in their advocacies. Okay, so Fridays for Future Singapore can be that as well. Okay, you guys can help different environmental groups talk to each other and talk to whoever needs to be talked to. If that's your government, possibly help in passing better bills, or your politicians talk to them on what they can actually do to support the climate campaigns. Okay, and then lastly, after you've aroused people, make them know why this is important, and then you to organize them. The next one is to act. Okay, to mobilize, to actually do something about it. And then once again, mobilization is not just limited to protests. Okay, mobilizations can come in all forms of actions. That can be a signature campaign, a petition, you actually having a dialogue with your government officials. That's also part of mobilization, of acting. Okay, so I am giving you guys this pattern to hopefully help you guys understand what you guys can actually do. Okay, and yes, the environmental activism may not necessarily be that, what do you call this, popular in Singapore as opposed to the Philippines or in other countries. But we have to understand the first point. We have to arouse people and make them understand why this is very urgent. So webinars like these is a very helpful tool to make people know and understand more why we are doing these things, why we are mobilized, why we are talking about the climate crisis all over the world, not just in Singapore, not just in Philippines, not just Asia, but the entire world. Okay, so basically that's it. If you guys have any more questions, any more comments or concerns, I am free to answer those live. But yeah, basically that's it. We have to remember that while we may not be in the situation where we feel the climate crisis, we are in the situation wherein we can actually amplify the voices of those unheard. That's why we should all work together and act together to have genuine climate action. All right. Thank you, guys.
Hi. Thank you, Xian, for that very interesting sharing. And I feel like it echoes a lot of about the things that happen right here in Singapore as well. Right, because I think when you talk about how like all we've been told is the three R's, that's actually what happens here also. We've just been told, oh, you should just reduce, recycle. You should just turn off the light and like don't talk about about oil, about all of these big issues. And yeah, that's what we've been told to talk about all this time. So, what do you think? Like, how are ways that we can educate people, especially because like a lot of people just they don't really think about this, and in the school we aren't really taught, and we don't have a platform to talk about this, and going through live streams like this where people have to especially go and look out for them, sometimes they can tell. So how do we engage people who are not really into the, like, this environmental scene?
Okay, that's a very good question. Okay, so when we talk about educating people, what we have to do is find something that is actually affecting them. Okay, so what I talked to you guys earlier about was me. I don't necessarily feel the effects of climate crisis, but me as a person, ever since I was a kid, I wanted to be a scientist, and what I wanted to happen was that I want to talk to people about science in such a way that science is not shocking or something that's highfalutin or something that they could not understand. And one of the things that made me go into climate activism and being an environmentalist is that around, I think it was around 2017, wherein there's a lot of climate change deniers popping out all over the world. So, me as a person that wants to communicate science to people, this is something that's a red flag for me. I do not want people to think that climate change is not real. Okay, so that's what happened to me personally. I found the red flag uh, in the things that I am passionate about. So, what you guys can actually do in terms of educating people is actually learning what people are basically what they advocate for, or maybe things that they care about. So, when they care, maybe they possibly care about food sustainability. You can talk to them about the climate crisis is actually reducing the sustainability of food all over the world, or maybe they're an advocate for cleaner transport instead of being smelling the smoke from all the cars we have uh, yeah on the streets. Maybe advocating for bike lanes is something that they actually understand. So find something that they are passionate about and then connect that to climate. That's one of the things that you can actually do. That though happens on a personal level. So in the grand scheme of things, when you talk about systems, one of the demands that we are bringing this September 25, last yesterday, when we had our climate action in the Philippines, is that um, we want to expand climate education in schools. Okay, so how that happens is actually up to the government. So what we are advocating for and what we are trying to do with these are is actually talking to different government officials and telling them that, oh, we need to expand how we talk about climate in the basic schools, grade school, or yeah, basic schooling. We cannot talk about climate education in terms of reduce, reuse, recycle anymore. And if the Department of Education in the Philippines agrees to that, which we are actually quite hopeful because the Department of Education in the Philippines has been actually supportive of the different strikes that we are having, more and more teachers and more educators would actually try to incorporate that in the way that they teach climate change and global warming in the school. So yeah, maybe what you guys can actually do is try to talk to your government officials, try to talk to your Department of Education or that counterpart in your government to actually try to revise the curriculum in such a way that climate education is highlighted and it's not just boiling down to the very, very individualistic actions that has been persistent in the climate education all over the world.
Right. Thank you for that question. I think that we have two questions from the chat now. So one of them from Rachel. She asks, if the government's main rhetoric is to advocate for individual action, how do we shift that rhetoric away from that into something that have wider impact, that things that truly matter?
All right. Yeah, that's actually a wonderful question. So, yeah, I've been talking about individualistic actions or individual actions earlier, and I told you guys that that is not enough. Okay, so let's talk about numbers. And these are the numbers that you actually have to remember and you have to inform more people about for them to understand that individual actions are very important, but they will not answer the climate crisis. They will not solve the climate crisis. So the first one is when we talk about emitters and the global carbon emissions that we have, only 100 companies are responsible for 71% of all the carbon emissions that we are having. So imagine that. So okay, we are talking about 100 companies. There are thousands more of companies that are not there. So thousands of companies that are not there. There's also the different industries that are not there, and then there's the individual actions. All of those comprise the 29%. Okay, so if we try to remove all of those, okay, so imagine this reality wherein we all have zero carbon emissions. Okay, that's unrealistic, but try to bear with me here. Let's just imagine a world where that is the reality. There's still those 100 companies that is polluting our world. 71% is still there. Okay, and the IPCC said that we should reduce our carbon emissions by half. So even if everyone tries to remove our individual carbon emissions, there's still those 100 companies with that 71%. Okay, so we cannot achieve the IPCC standard of cutting it by half. The other thing that we have to remember is when we talk about individual actions, the 10% richest people in the world, the 10% wealthiest, contribute to 50% of global carbon emissions, while the poorest 50% of the world only contributes around 10%. So this is a shocking number. Many people are actually thinking that, oh, if everyone does it, it's already okay. But we have to remember that the contributions of different people are actually very different as well. And if we look at those numbers I've mentioned earlier, unless you're part of the 10%, the 50%, let's say half of the world, the poorest 50% tries to remove all their carbon emissions, the emissions basically that is from the the individual contributions to carbon emissions will only be reduced by 10%. Okay, so that's the disparity when it comes to carbon emissions. And we have to educate more people about those numbers and those statistics that we can actually see now that, oh, we actually have to hold countries. Okay, so we should shift our actions into calling out those people, those companies that are actually in charge. Okay, those people who are contributing the most, they have to be more accountable than us individual peoples that are trying to reduce our carbon footprints to the very maximum that we can have.
All right, thank you for the answer. I think we have a very interesting question by Mutansia. I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrongly. So he or she asked about how we can prevent groupthink arising to fighting climate change. Groupthink, like when people talk about decarbonizing transport, a lot of people would like to, a lot of activists might be hung over, they will bash like biofuels and hydrogen and actively promote electric vehicles, but we don't really think about the pollution due to the mining of batteries. So I think the question is that activists may tend to think that there is like a silver bullet, like one size fits all solution, and like a lot of people may just harp on this idea without thinking deeply about it. So how do we prevent activists, people in this sphere, from like um, from following the groupthink mentality?
All right. Yeah, that's actually a good question. And I want to answer that with education. Okay. When we educate each other and when we educate different people, we have to remember that there is no one size fits all solution to the climate crisis in different countries. We actually have different demands than people in other countries. So let me give you guys an example. Okay. So if you guys in Singapore, when you try to draft your demands for your government or to the different companies, it may be different from the ones in the Philippines. Okay, so that's where climate education steps in once again. Okay, when we talk about activism, activism isn't blind. We have to remember that. Activism, before we do a lot of research, a lot of discussion that goes on. So this webinar, this is one of the things that we can actually do to educate more and more people about different actions. So me, as a Filipino that is not from Singapore, and we have Singaporean audience right now, this is something that actually helps you guys see that, oh, this is what's happening in the Philippines. But this may not be exactly what you guys should do in Singapore. Okay, so a lot of research comes in there. So we have this term called social investigation and class analysis. Okay, we do that before we launch any campaign. So when we talk about social investigation, we have to look at, okay, who are the people that are involved, who are the stakeholders, who is being oppressed, quote unquote, who are the oppressors, what is the reality of the environment that they are living in. Are they being struck by natural disasters, activities that are actually amplifying or making these calamities so much worse? So the research part is very important because once you've done your research, then you can actually think and collaborate about what action you can do with your organization or with the alliances that you are part of. That's wherein the organization part of the arouse, organize, and mobilize pattern that you are doing comes in. So now that everyone has their own research, now we collaborate. Okay, is this thing the thing that we should do? Or is this one better? Okay, if this is the thing that we want to do, what are the possible consequences that this will have to the different stakeholders, to the environment, to the different people? Okay, and that's when we mobilize. After that, that's when we mobilize. Okay, so the specific pattern that I told you guys about, the arouse, organize, and mobilize, you guys can actually do that as well, for you guys to actually know what demands you are going to bring and what actions that you are going to do. So we can help you guys with that. If ever we can collaborate about, uh, possibly we can give comments to you guys on what we think. But ultimately, the decision is ultimately yours. When you are an activist, you have to remember that you should not follow the group mentality or the bandwagons that, okay, everyone is going against fossil fuel companies. That's what we should do too. But if fossil fuel companies aren't your biggest polluter in your area, or there's something more urgent in your area, that's the thing that you should focus on first. Okay, so there's this importance and urgency aspect to things that when we do campaigns, we have to look into which is more important and which is more urgent before we yeah, summarize the campaign calendars for the year or for the month or for the week.
Right. So, right. So thank you for that. I think we. Oh, yeah, right. So thank you for that. We do have one last question, which is how, in your experience, or at least in YACAT's experience, how has the Philippines, at least how have your local communities been impacted by climate change? For example, just from what I know, the Philippines has been particularly hard hit by typhoons in recent years and among other natural disasters. And so how has climate change impacted the Philippines in that way?
All right. Thank you so much for that question. So, yeah, going back to the Philippines, I talked about the natural disasters that are in the Philippines. So, yes, those disasters or those calamities are natural, but climate change is making things so much more frequent and so much worse. Okay, so when we talk about typhoons, the Philippines is that's normal for Filipinos, us being hit by heavy typhoons and strong rains. But what's happening right now is we are experiencing rains, torrential rains that are like unprecedented. These rains, these floodings, these storm surges, these tsunamis, these wildfires, all of these natural disasters that we are experiencing are actually being made worse because of the climate crisis. So, for example, in the Philippines, we have been hit recently with Typhoon Yolanda. Typhoon Yolanda happened a couple of years back, and that was a super strong storm, a super strong typhoon, wherein like a province was almost decimated and destroyed to the ground because of how strong and how powerful the storm was and the storm surges were. And in the Philippines as well, we are also hit by like okay, if there are Filipinos that are watching this, they'll be like, "Oh yeah, that is normal. We have typhoons and everything, but the Filipinos are resilient. That's why even if we have flooding in the Philippines, when we see a television camera, we still smile." But in reality, if you are part of the urban poor communities, if you are part of the rural people, people in the rural communities, you are actually hit very hard. The economic and the social aspect of the disasters that we are experiencing is very extreme in the sense that right now we are in a pandemic. So we have the COVID-19 pandemic plus the storms and typhoons that we are experiencing recently and currently. So imagine that hit to the poor people and to the people in far-flung communities. How can they bounce back from those? Okay, and we also have wildfires in the Philippines. So all over the world, there have been images and videos of wildfires, and that is not new to Filipinos as well. because we have wildfires in the Philippines. Um, but the problem there is, well, wildfires are again natural and they are normal, like typhoons. The problem right now is the climate crisis is making it worse. The droughts, the wildfires are persisting for so much longer than in what we had before, and like once again, the economic and social repercussions of these calamities have been extremely affecting the different peoples in our communities. So yeah, when we I can't actually give you guys specifics because it's very normal to us now. So yeah, basically extreme floods, extreme droughts, yeah, crops wilting, crops dying. Our farmers are hit especially with a double whammy because we have droughts in around March, and then at the latter time of the year we have extreme storms. So our farmers and our sustainability is hit extremely hard by this climate crisis because of how the climate crisis and these disasters are affecting our agricultural sector as well. So yeah, basically calamities are being so much worse right now because of the climate crisis.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for your sharing. And I think we've learned a lot about how this has impacted your communities and a lot about the situation in the Philippines. And so thank you very much for your sharing. And I think we have all learned a lot about it. Thank you.
All
Yeah.
right, thank you guys. Thank you, Hong and Ming.
Stay safe, I guess.